The girl dropped. Gavin caught her awkwardly, kept her from hitting broken glass. He pulled her out, dragging her gently into cold air. Immediately, the dog moved. The shepherd began licking the girl's face frantically, checking for injuries. She buried her face in the dog's wet, bloody fur and sobbed. "Stay with him," Gavin ordered, pointing to a sheltered spot beneath the oak trunk. "Stay." He turned back to the car. The woman was priority now. If she was still alive, time was critical. Hanging upside down was dangerous blood pooling in her head. If her neck was injured, movement could be fatal. Gavin crawled deeper into the wreckage, shimmying over the back seat into the front. He checked for a pulse at her neck, thought it was there. Faint. Thready. But there. "Ma'am," he said firmly. No response. He found the seatbelt release. This was trickier. He braced his legs against the dashboard and wrapped one arm around her torso to support her weight. He hit the button. She was heavier than she looked. Dead weight slumped into his arm. They both collapsed awkwardly onto the interior roof. Gavin grunted as his elbow slammed the gear shift, but he didn't let go. He stabilized her neck as best he could. Dragging her out was a nightmare of physics and friction. He had to back out through the rear window while pulling her along the ceiling. He breathed through his teeth, ignoring the protest of aging muscles. Finally, he emerged into the snow, pulling the woman clear of the metal tomb. He laid her gently beside the girl. She was pale. Porcelain skin in the flashlight beam. Nasty gash on her forehead stopped bleeding, likely due to cold and shock. Gavin stripped off his heavy canvas jacket. Left in just flannel and thermal undershirt, biting wind attacked immediately. But he didn't care. He draped the jacket over the woman and girl, tucking edges around them. He looked at the dog. The animal sat beside the woman's head. Blood dripped steadily from a deep cut on its left foreleg, staining snow. But the dog didn't seem to notice. Its ears were swiveling, scanning the woods above the ravine. Not relaxing. Guarding. Gavin reached out and touched the dog's head. Fur was freezing, matted with ice. "You did good," Gavin whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You saved them." He looked back at the severed brake line, hidden in the dark undercarriage. Looked at the unconscious woman and terrified child. Looked at the dog, a soldier who'd held the line until reinforcements arrived. Gavin knew with the certainty of a man who'd seen too much war that the danger wasn't over. The storm was the least of their worries. Whoever cut that line might come looking to see if their work was finished. He couldn't leave them here. Couldn't wait for help that might never come on this deserted road. He had to move them now. Part 4. The cabin fortress. The journey back to the cabin was a blur of adrenaline and white-knuckle driving. Gavin's Ford pickup groaned under the strain, clawing its way up the winding logging road. Headlights cut narrow tunnels through swirling snow. Every bump sent a jolt of anxiety through him, not for himself, but for the fragile cargo beside him on the bench seat. The woman whose driver's license identified her as Taylor Corves slumped against the door, unconscious but breathing. Little Mia was squeezed between them, wrapped in Gavin's canvas jacket, small hand gripping the gear shift like a lifeline. In the footwell, curled beneath the dashboard heater, lay Buddy. The German shepherd hadn't made a sound since leaving the ravine, but his amber eyes remained fixed on Gavin, blinking slowly, fighting exhaustion. Finally, the dark shape of the cabin emerged from the storm. Gavin pulled as close to the porch as possible, leaving the engine running for heat. He opened his door, braving biting wind to run around to the passenger side. "Mia," he said gently, voice rough from cold. "We're here. I need you to run to the door. Can you do that?" She nodded, eyes wide and terrified. Gavin scooped her up and set her on the sheltered porch. "Stay there." He returned for Taylor. Lifting her was difficult. His back screamed in protest. But he gritted his teeth, hoisting her into his arms. She felt dangerously light as he stepped onto the porch. A gray shape brushed past his legs. Buddy limped heavily, favoring his left front leg where glass had sliced him. But he refused to wait in the truck. He positioned himself at the door, ears swiveling, waiting for Gavin to unlock it. Gavin kicked the door shut behind them, sealing out the roar of wind. Silence inside was sudden and heavy. The cabin was cold empty for hours, but smelled of wood smoke and old leather. Tonight it smelled like a field hospital. He carried Taylor to the large leather sofa in front of the cast iron wood stove, laying her down gently. Grabbed a wool blanket to cover her. Then turned to the stove. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, crumbling newspaper, stacking kindling, striking a match. Within minutes, the fire roared, casting flickering orange glow across the room. "Come here, sweetie," Gavin said to Mia. He pulled a heavy armchair close to the fire. "Sit here. Warm up." Mia obeyed, curling into a tight ball, eyes never leaving her mother. Gavin retrieved his first aid kit from the bathroom. Not a standard household box of military-grade trauma, bags stocked for worst-case scenarios. He knelt beside the sofa and began assessing Taylor. Pulse was stronger now. The gash on her forehead was nasty, but had stopped bleeding. He cleaned it carefully with antiseptic, applying a butterfly bandage. As he worked, he felt a presence at his shoulder. Buddy sat there, watching his every move. The dog was shivering. Drops of melted snow and blood fell onto wooden floorboards. "You're next, pal," Gavin murmured. Suddenly Taylor gasped sharp intake of breath that sucked air from the room. Her eyes flew open, unfocused and wild. She thrashed, hands flailing. "No. No, please," she cried, voice ragged. "Easy," Gavin said, leaning back to give her space but keeping hands visible. "You're safe. You're in a cabin. I found you in the ravine." Taylor scrambled backward, pressing against the back of the sofa. Chest heaved. She looked around frantically until her eyes landed on Mia. "Mia!" "Mommy!" The little girl launched herself from the chair, burying her face in her mother's chest. Taylor gripped her so tightly her knuckles turned white, rocking back and forth, sobbing dry, tearless heaves. Then her eyes snapped to Gavin. No gratitude, yet only primal fear. She saw a strange man, large and imposing, in a remote cabin. "Who are you?" she whispered. "What do you want?" "My name is Gavin Mercer," he said, voice low and level. "I was driving on Route 201. Your dog stopped my truck. I pulled you out of the car." Taylor looked down at Buddy. The dog had moved to the sofa, resting his heavy head on her knee, letting out a low whine. Recognition broke something inside her. She slumped, adrenaline fading into exhaustion. "The car," she stammered. "The brakes, they didn't work. I tried to stop, but the pedal just went to the floor." Gavin hesitated, decided not to tell her about the cut lines yet. She was barely holding on. "I know," was all he said. "You crashed, but you're alive." Taylor reached out and grabbed Gavin's wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, born of desperation. Eyes locked onto his and in that moment, years melted away for Gavin. "Please," she begged, voice trembling. "You have to help us. Don't let them find us. If they know we're alive, they'll come back. Please." The look in her eyes hit Gavin like a physical blow. The cabin faded. Smell of wood smoke replaced by jungle rot and damp earth. He was 24 again, kneeling in mud, looking down at Jack, his spotter. His brother. Jack had grabbed his wrist just like this. "Don't let me die here, Gabe. Get me home." Gavin hadn't been able to keep that promise. The extraction chopper had been 5 minutes too late. He'd spent 3 decades running from that look, hiding in these woods to avoid ever being responsible for another life. And now here it was again. The same terrifying trust, The same plea for salvation. Gavin's hand trembled. He wanted to pull away, to tell her to call the police, to leave him out of it. But then he looked at Mia burying her face in her mother's coat. Looked at the dog bleeding on his floor, but still watching him with expectant amber eyes. He couldn't turn away. Not this time. Gavin covered Taylor's hand with his own rough, calloused skin against hers. "I won't let them touch you," he said, voice deeper now. The voice of the soldier he thought he'd buried. "You're safe here. I promise." Taylor stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of deception. Whatever she saw on his tired, lined features seemed to be enough. She nodded slowly and released his wrist, sinking back into the cushions. "Thank you," she whispered. Gavin stood, needing to move, needing to shake off the ghost that had crowded into the room. "I need to check the dog," he said gruffly. Motioned to Buddy. "Come here." The windshield wipers of Gavin Mercer's aging Ford pickup fought a losing battle against the November blizzard. Each pass cleared a brief wedge of visibility before heavy snow plastered the glass again. He leaned forward, knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes burning from staring into the hypnotic white void 20. One cut through the heart of northern Maine wilderness, a lonely stretch of blacktop that felt like the edge of the world tonight. No tire tracks, no headlights for over an hour. Just howling wind and deepening drifts. At 62, Gavin welcomed the isolation. The silence of deep woods was preferable to the noise in his own head. But tonight, the storm felt personal wind hammering his truck, trying to shove him into the ditches. Inside the cab, the heater rattled, pumping barely lukewarm air. Gavin could see his breath. His fingers found the familiar weight in his jacket pocket. A Zippo lighter he hadn't used in years. Just a talisman. His thumb rubbed the worn engraving. Jack, 1985. He thought about turning back. The cabin was still 20 miles north. But turning around in this whiteout seemed harder than pushing forward. Then something shifted in the white noise. Not a shadow. There was no light to cast one. Just a denser shape forming directly in his high beams. Gavin's foot slammed the brake. The truck shuddered violently, tires losing grip on slick asphalt. The rear end swung toward the pines in a slow, sickening fishtail. He fought the wheel, heart hammering. The truck slid to a halt, angled sharply across the road. Engine stalling. Sudden silence except for muffled wind. Gavin peered through the snow-clogged windshield. A dog stood in the truck's path. Large, a German shepherd with pale gray and white coat. Ghost-like against the blizzard. Not cowering, planted, rigid, facing the 2-ton machine without flinching. "Move," Gavin muttered, restarting the engine. He tapped the horn. The sound was swallowed by wind. The dog didn't blink, just stared straight through the glass. Right at him, Gavin cursed. He couldn't drive around it, snowbanks too high, ditch too close. He grabbed his flashlight and jammed his hat tighter. The wind ripped the door from his hand when he opened it. Cold hit like a physical blow. He sank knee-deep in drifts, trudging toward the front of the truck. Up close, the animal was shivering violently. Ice matted its fur. Snow crusted its muzzle. It looked impossibly weary. "Hey!" Gavin shouted over the wind. "You got a death wish, buddy? Get out of the road." The dog didn't flinch, just held his gaze. As Gavin bent to get a better look, his heavy jacket shifted. The silver Zippo slipped silently from his pocket, burying itself in the deep snow between his boots. He didn't feel it, didn't notice. He stepped closer, intending to grab the collar and drag the animal aside. That's when he really looked into the dog's eyes. Amber, startling, framed by snow-crusted lashes. No aggression, no feral wildness. Instead, an abyss of sheer, unadulterated terror. A silent scream for help that transcended species. The world stopped. Gavin wasn't on a frozen highway anymore. He was transported back 25 years to a muddy, rain-soaked depression in a foreign land. Kneeling over Jack, 19 years old, bleeding out faster than Gavin could pack the wound. Jack's eyes in those final seconds, wide, terrified, fixed on Gavin with soul-crushing reliance. "Don't leave me. Gavin, please. You gotta fix this." Gavin stared at the dog, breath-catching. It was the same look. The exact same eyes. The dog let out a high, desperate, keening noise that cut through his chest. It took 2 stiff steps backward, turned toward the impenetrable darkness of the woods, then looked back at Gavin. Not here. There. The message was unmistakable. Gavin didn't make a conscious decision. The practical part of his brain screamed that leaving the road was suicide. But the image of Jack's eyes superimposed over the dog's desperate gaze paralyzed his reason. He had failed Jack. Watched the light go out. Helpless. The guilt was the stone he carried every single day. The German shepherd turned and bounded through deep snow toward the tree line. Casting one final imploring look over its shoulder, Gavin gripped the flashlight tighter and stepped off the asphalt. He plunged into thigh-deep snow, following the ghost dog into the suffocating darkness of the forest. Part 2. The ravine. The transition from exposed highway to dense forest was instant and disorienting. The howling wind transformed into a deep, hollow roar high in the canopy. Down among thick pine trunks, the air was stiller but colder, biting through denim and flannel. Gavin followed the dog. The gray and white shepherd moved with surprising speed despite the snow depth, weaving through black pillars of trees. Every few yards it stopped, amber eyes reflecting his flashlight beam, checking that the slow 2-legged creature was still following. Gavin pushed forward, breath coming in ragged clouds. At 62, his knees complained with every high step. But he didn't slow down. The desperation in the dog's eyes had hooked something deep inside him. They traveled perhaps 200 yards when the terrain dropped away abruptly. Gavin skidded to a halt inches from a precipice. His flashlight played over the edge, revealing a steep, jagged ravine cutting through the forest floor like an open wound. The slope was covered in torn brush and gouged earth. Partially hidden by rapidly accumulating snow. At the bottom, about 50 feet down, lay a dark metallic shape, a black sedan, overturned, resting on its roof, wedged violently between 2 massive oak trees. Metal crumpled and distorted. The sight punched the air from Gavin's lungs. The dog didn't hesitate. It plunged over the edge, half sliding, half running down the treacherous slope. Gavin followed, grabbing saplings and exposed roots to slow his descent. His boots slid uncontrollably on slick mud beneath the snow. When he reached the bottom, the silence was heavy. Not peaceful, suffocating. No smoke, no ticking engine. Just the whisper of falling snow settling on wreckage. "Hello?" Gavin shouted, voice cracking. "Can anyone hear me?" No answer. He moved toward the vehicle, sweeping his flashlight beam over it. Impact had been severe. Roof crushed inward. Windows blown out. He circled to the passenger side. That's where he found the dog. The German shepherd was pressing its body tight against the shattered rear passenger window, trembling not from cold, but exertion. As Gavin brought the light closer, he winced. Snow beneath the dog's paws was stained bright crimson. Shards of safety glass had sliced into its shoulder and legs. Yet it refused to pull back. It was using its own thick coat as a living shield, blocking wind and snow from blowing into the cabin. "Easy, boy," Gavin said gently, reaching out. "I'm here to help." The dog looked at him, ears flattened. A low rumble vibrated in its chest, not a threat, but a warning to be careful. It shifted slightly, allowing Gavin to peer into the gloom of the overturned cabin. Inside, suspended upside down by a seatbelt, was a small girl, maybe 6 years old. Eyes wide with shock, staring at the ceiling, now the floor. Whimpering softly. "Hi there," Gavin said, keeping his voice low and steady. "My name is Gavin. I'm going to get you out of there." The girl didn't respond. Her gaze fixed on something in the front seat. Gavin shifted his light dot in the driver's seat. Also hanging from her belt was a woman, head lolled at an unnatural angle. Long dark hair hanging like a curtain. Completely motionless, Gavin's combat instincts took over. Assessment, triage, extraction. He braced his boot against the frame and pulled. The door groaned but held fast. Twisted frame. He needed leverage. Looking for a branch or rock, his eyes caught something underneath the car. Because it was upside down, the undercarriage was exposed. He paused, leaned closer, wiped snow from the wheel well near the rear tire. A clear fluid dripped slowly onto snow. Not gas. Brake fluid. Gavin traced the line back. The flexible hose leading to the caliper hadn't snapped from impact tension. It ended abruptly. Clean cut. Perfectly perpendicular. No fraying. No jagged tear marks from brush or impact. Chill swept down his spine. This wasn't an accident. Someone had taken a blade to this line. Severed it with precision and intent. He looked back at the woman hanging. In the front seat, this was a kill box. Someone had sent this woman. And child hurtling down this road knowing exactly what would happen at the first sharp curve. The realization hardened his resolve. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was a protection detail. Part 3. Extraction. Under fire, Gavin returned his attention to the door. "Okay," he grunted. "We do this the hard way." He took the heavy flashlight and smashed remaining jagged glass from the window frame, clearing the opening. The dog whined, watching intently. "I know," Gavin muttered. "I've got them." He reached inside, straining. Couldn't reach the woman's seatbelt release from here. Had to start with the girl. "Sweetheart," he said, "I'm going to unbuckle you. You're going to fall a little, but I'll catch you, okay?" The girl blinked. Tears spilled over. She gave a tiny nod. Gavin maneuvered through the window, braced one hand on the roof, now the floor, and reached up with the other to find the buckle release. Click. The girl dropped. Gavin caught her awkwardly, kept her from hitting broken glass. He pulled her out, dragging her gently into cold air. Immediately, the dog moved. The shepherd began licking the girl's face frantically, checking for injuries. She buried her face in the dog's wet, bloody fur and sobbed. "Stay with him," Gavin ordered, pointing to a sheltered spot beneath the oak trunk. "Stay." He turned back to the car. The woman was priority now. If she was still alive, time was critical. Hanging upside down was dangerous blood pooling in her head. If her neck was injured, movement could be fatal. Gavin crawled deeper into the wreckage, shimmying over the back seat into the front. He checked for a pulse at her neck. It was there. Faint. Thready. But there. "Ma'am," he said firmly. No response. He found the seatbelt release. This was trickier. He braced his legs against the dashboard and wrapped one arm around her torso to support her weight. He hit the button. She was heavier than she looked. Dead weight slumped into his arm. They both collapsed awkwardly onto the interior roof. Gavin grunted as his elbow slammed the gear shift, but he didn't let go. He stabilized her neck as best he could. Dragging her out was a nightmare of physics and friction. He had to back out through the rear window while pulling her along the ceiling. He breathed through his teeth, ignoring the protest of aging muscles. Finally, he emerged into the snow, pulling the woman clear of the metal tomb. He laid her gently beside the girl. She was pale. Porcelain skin in the flashlight beam. Nasty gash on her forehead stopped bleeding, likely due to cold and shock. Gavin stripped off his heavy canvas jacket. Left in just flannel and thermal undershirt, biting wind attacked immediately. But he didn't care. He draped a jacket over the woman and girl, tucking edges around them. He looked at the dog. The animal sat beside the woman's head. Blood dripped steadily from a deep cut on its left foreleg, staining snow. But the dog didn't seem to notice. Its ears were swiveling, scanning the woods above the ravine. Not relaxing. Guarding Dog Gavin reached out and touched the dog's head. Fur was freezing, matted with ice. "You did good," Gavin whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You saved them." He looked back at the severed brake line, hidden in the dark undercarriage. Looked at the unconscious woman and terrified child. Looked at the dog, a soldier who'd held the line until reinforcements arrived. Gavin knew with the certainty of a man who'd seen too much war that the danger wasn't over. The storm was the least of their worries. Whoever cut that line might come looking to see if their work was finished. He couldn't leave them here. Couldn't wait for help that might never come on this deserted road. He had to move them now. Part 4. The cabin fortress. The journey back to the cabin was a blur of adrenaline and white-knuckle driving. Gavin's Ford pickup groaned under the strain, clawing its way up the winding logging road. Headlights cut narrow tunnels through swirling snow. Every bump sent a jolt of anxiety through him, not for himself, but for the fragile cargo beside him on the bench seat. The woman whose driver's license identified her as Taylor Corves slumped against the door, unconscious but breathing. Little Mia was squeezed between them, wrapped in Gavin's canvas jacket, small hand gripping the gear shift like a lifeline. Dot in the footwell, curled beneath the dashboard heater. "Lay, buddy." The German shepherd hadn't made a sound since leaving the ravine, but his amber eyes remained fixed on Gavin, blinking slowly, fighting exhaustion. Finally, the dark shape of the cabin emerged from the storm. Gavin pulled as close to the porch as possible, leaving the engine running for heat. He opened his door, braving biting wind to run around to the passenger side. "Mia," he said gently, voice rough from cold. "We're here. I need you to run to the door. Can you do that?" She nodded, eyes wide and terrified. Gavin scooped her up and set her on the sheltered porch. "Stay there." He returned for Taylor. Lifting her was difficult. His back screamed in protest. But he gritted his teeth, hoisting her into his arms. She felt dangerously light. As he stepped onto the porch, a gray shape brushed past his legs. Buddy limped heavily, favoring his left front leg where glass had sliced him. But he refused to wait in the truck. He positioned himself at the door, ears swiveling, waiting for Gavin to unlock it. Gavin kicked the door shut behind them, sealing out the roar of wind. Silence inside was sudden and heavy. The cabin was cold, empty for hours, but smelled of wood smoke and old leather. Tonight it smelled like a field hospital. He carried Taylor to the large leather sofa in front of the cast iron wood stove, laying her down gently. Grabbed a wool blanket to cover her. Then turned to the stove. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, crumbling newspaper, stacking kindling, striking a match. Within minutes, the fire roared, casting flickering orange glow across the room. "Come here, sweetie," Gavin said to Mia. He pulled a heavy armchair close to the fire. "Sit here. Warm up." Mia obeyed, curling into a tight ball, eyes never leaving her mother. Gavin retrieved his first aid kit from the bathroom. Not a standard household box, a military-grade trauma bag stocked for worst-case scenarios. He knelt beside the sofa and began assessing Taylor. Pulse was stronger now. The gash on her forehead was nasty, but had stopped bleeding. He cleaned it carefully with antiseptic, applying a butterfly bandage. As he worked, he felt a presence at his shoulder. Buddy sat there, watching his every move. The dog was shivering. Drops of melted snow and blood fell onto wooden floorboards. "You're next, pal," Gavin murmured. Suddenly Taylor gasped sharp intake of breath that sucked air from the room. Her eyes flew open, unfocused and wild. she thrashed, hands flailing. No. No, please, she cried, voice ragged. Easy, Gavin said, leaning back to give her space but keeping hands visible. You're safe. You're in a cabin. I found you in the ravine. Taylor scrambled backward, pressing against the back of the sofa. Chest heaved. She looked around frantically until her eyes landed on Mia. Mia. Mommy! The little girl launched herself from the chair, burying her face in her mother's chest. Taylor gripped her so tightly her knuckles turned white, rocking back and forth, sobbing dry, tearless heaves. Then her eyes snapped to Gavin. No gratitude, yet only primal fear. She saw a strange man, large and imposing, in a remote cabin. Who are you? She whispered. What do you want? My name is Gavin Mercer, he said, voice low and level. I was driving on Route 201. Your dog stopped my truck. I pulled you out of the car. Taylor looked down at Buddy. The dog had moved to the sofa, resting his heavy head on her knee, letting out a low whine. Recognition broke something inside her. She slumped, adrenaline fading into exhaustion. The car, she stammered. The brakes, they didn't work. I tried to stop, but the pedal just went to the floor. Gavin hesitated. Decided not to tell her about the cut lines yet. She was barely holding on. I know, was all he said. You crashed, but you're alive. Taylor reached out and grabbed Gavin's wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, born of desperation. Eyes locked onto his dot, and in that moment, years melted away for Gavin. Please, she begged, voice trembling. You have to help us. Don't let them find us. If they know we're alive, they'll come back. Please. The look in her eyes hit Gavin like a physical blow. The cabin faded. Smell of wood smoke replaced by jungle rot and damp earth. He was 24 again, kneeling in mud. Looking down at Jack, his spotter. His brother. Jack had grabbed his wrist just like this. Don't let me die here, Gabe. Get me home. Gavin hadn't been able to keep that promise. The extraction chopper had been 5 minutes too late. He'd spent 3 decades running from that look, hiding in these woods to avoid ever being responsible for another life. And now here it was again. The same terrifying trust. The same plea for salvation. Gavin's hand trembled. He wanted to pull away, to tell her to call the police, to leave him out of it. But then he looked at Mia burying her face in her mother's coat. Looked at the dog bleeding on his floor, but still watching him with expectant amber eyes. He couldn't turn away. Not this time. Gavin covered Taylor's hand with his own rough, calloused skin against hers. I won't let them touch you, he said, voice deeper now. The voice of the soldier he thought he'd buried. You're safe here. I promise. Taylor stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of deception. Whatever she saw on his tired, lined features seemed to be enough. She nodded slowly and released his wrist, sinking back into the cushions. Thank you, she whispered. Gavin stood, needing to move, needing to shake off the ghost that had crowded into the room. I need to check the dog, he said gruffly. Motioned to Buddy. Come here. To his surprise, the dog didn't come. Buddy stood, shook himself, sending spray of water across the room, then limped stiffly toward the front door. He sniffed at the gap beneath the wood, then moved to the window, placed from paws on the sill, peering out into swirling darkness. Buddy, come lay down, Taylor said weakly. Rest. The dog ignored her, dropped to all fours and paced the length of the main room. Movements agitated. Checked the kitchen window. Moved to the bedroom door. Checked darkness inside. Returned to the front door, ears rotating like radar dishes. Gavin watched him, fascinated. Most dogs after an ordeal like that would be curled by the fire, sleeping deeply. But Buddy was fighting his own biology. Head hung low with exhaustion, legs trembling. but he wouldn't stop moving. Gavin walked over to the window where Buddy stood, knelt beside him. Up close, he could see the glazed look in the animal's eyes. The dog was running on fumes and instinct. "He's not just a pet, is he?" Gavin asked, looking back at Taylor. Taylor shook her head, stroking Mia's hair. "My husband, Marcus, he bought Buddy as a puppy." Marcus was a canine handler for the private sector. He trained Buddy himself. He used to say Buddy took his job more seriously than most people. Gavin nodded slowly. Made sense now. The blockade on the road. The shielding of the child. The refusal to rest. This wasn't just loyalty. It was discipline. The dog was on duty. He knew the threat wasn't over even if the humans didn't. "He's clearing the perimeter," Gavin murmured. Looked at the dog with newfound respect. "He thinks we're still in the kill zone." Gavin reached out, placed a firm hand on Buddy's shoulder. Muscles beneath wet fur were coiled tight as steel cables. "Stand down, soldier," Gavin said softly. "I've got the watch." Buddy looked at Gavin for a second. The two of them locked eyes. Old recon scout and four-legged guardian. There was a moment of understanding. A silent passing of the torch. Buddy let out a long, heavy sigh. Tension drained from his frame. He didn't go to the fire, though. Instead, he limped over to the spot directly in front of the heavy oak door. He circled 3 times and collapsed with a heavy thud, positioning himself so anyone entering would have to step over him. He rested his chin on his paws, eyes closing halfway, but ears remained pricked, swiveling toward the storm outside. Gavin stood and checked the deadbolt on the door, slid the heavy iron latch into place. He went to the gun rack on the wall and took down his old hunting rifle, checking the chamber. Not for a deer, for something much more dangerous. He pulled a wooden chair over to the window overlooking the driveway, sat down, rifle resting across his knees, stared out into the white void. Inside the cabin, the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and rhythmic breathing of the survivors. But Gavin knew the silence was temporary. The storm was hiding them for now. But storms eventually passed, and when this one cleared, the wolves would come looking for their prey. Gavin rubbed his thumb over the empty pocket where his Zippo used to be, feeling a phantom weight. He didn't know yet that he'd left a calling card in the snow. He only knew that, for the first time in 30 years, he had a mission. And this time, he wasn't going to fail. Part 5. The radio call. The storm outside had evolved from a howl to a low, rhythmic thumping against the log walls. Sound that made the silence inside the cabin feel even deeper. Gavin stood by the frost-rimmed window for a moment, watching the snow bury his truck, before turning his attention to the corner of the living room that served as his lifeline to the outside world. It was a small alcove, dominated by a sturdy wooden desk. On it sat a bank of equipment that looked like a relic from another era. A heavy HF transceiver with glowing amber dials, a stack of signal processors, and a large brushed metal microphone. To most, it looked like a hobbyist toy. To Gavin, it was the only way to speak. When the world went dark, he sat down in the creaking swivel chair and flipped the master power switch. The equipment hummed to life, warm light of the frequency display cutting through the gloom. "What are you doing?" Taylor's voice was weak, drifting from the sofa. She'd pulled herself up to sitting, watching him with wary eyes. Mia was asleep, head resting on her mother's lap. "Phone lines are dead," Gavin said, not looking back as he adjusted the gain knob. "Cell towers won't penetrate this valley in a storm like this. This is the only way to get a message out." He put on the headset, pressing the cups tight against his ears to block out the wind. Began to spin the tuning dial. The speaker crackled with chaotic noise whistles, pops, the ocean-like roar of static. The storm was playing havoc with the ionosphere, scattering signals like leaves in wind. Gavin kept his hand steady. He knew these frequencies like he knew the layout of the forest. He wasn't looking for just anyone. He was looking for a specific signature. A reliable operator he'd spoken to every Sunday night for 5 years. CQ, CQ, CQ. Gavin spoke into the microphone, voice calm and measured. This is Kilo Golf 1 Mike Romeo calling. Is anyone copying on this frequency? Over. Static was his only answer. He tried again, adjusting the squelch. CQ, CQ. This is Kilo Golf 1 Mike Romeo located in North Maine woods. Emergency traffic. I need a relay. Over. A minute passed. Then 2. Taylor shifted on the couch, the rustle of the blankets sounding loud in the quiet room. Gavin could feel tension radiating off her. If they couldn't reach anyone, they were ghosts in a white tomb. Then a voice cut through the white noise. Faint, warbling as the signal bounced off heavy cloud cover, but intelligible. Kilo Golf 1, this is Whiskey Tango. Rusty here. I hear you faint but clear. You okay, Gavin? Over. Gavin exhaled, shoulders dropping an inch. Rusty was a retired trucker in Ohio, with a rig powerful enough to talk to the moon. Rusty, good to hear you, Gavin said. I have a situation. I need you to make a landline call for me. I need you to contact the Maine State Police, specifically Troop E in Bangor. Ask them to patch you through to Sergeant Porter. Tell him Gavin Mercer is calling in a code red. There was a pause on the other end. Static swelling before Rusty's voice returned serious and sharp. Copy that? Gavin, contact Sergeant Porter, code red. What's the message? Over. Gavin glanced at Taylor. He wouldn't give details over the airwaves. Anyone could be listening. Tell him I have 2 packages secured at the outpost. Safe but stranded. Road is impassable. I need extraction as soon as the weather breaks. And tell him the brakes were cut. He'll know what to do. Over. Understood, Rusty replied. Packages secured, brakes cut. I'm making the call right now. Keep your radio on standby. Out. Gavin pulled the headset off and set it on the desk. Swiveled the chair to face Taylor. Message is sent, he said. Sergeant Porter is a good man. He's the one who checks on me when winters get bad. He'll organize a plow and a squad car as soon as they can get up the mountain. How long? Taylor asked. In this storm? Maybe 12 hours. Maybe 24. Taylor looked toward the door where Buddy was still lying across the threshold. The dog's eyes were open, staring at nothing, breathing shallow and rapid. I don't know if we can wait that long, she whispered. We're safe here, Gavin said firmly, standing up. Now we need to eat. You need strength. And so does he. He walked into the small kitchenette, opened the refrigerator running off his backup propane generator, and pulled out a package of venison jerky he'd smoked the previous autumn. Also grabbed some cheese and crackers for the girl and Taylor. He placed a plate of food on the small coffee table near Taylor. Eat. He ordered gently. Then he took the bag of jerky and walked toward the door. But he lifted his head as Gavin approached. Ears flattened slightly, not in aggression, but submission and exhaustion. He looked like a statue beginning to crack. Blood on his leg had dried into dark crust. Tremors had returned. Gavin sat down on the floor, crossing his legs, putting himself on the dog's level. Opened the bag. Rich, smoky scent of meat wafted into the air. Buddy's nose twitched, but he didn't move toward the food. His gaze flicked from jerky to window, then back to door. He won't eat, Taylor said softly from the couch. He hasn't eaten since yesterday morning. He's too stressed. He's not stressed, ma'am, Gavin said. He's working. He held the meat out, resting his hand on his knee. Didn't push it into the dog's face. Just waited. He thinks he's the only thing standing between you and the bad guys. He can't eat because he can't let his guard down. He's holding the line. Gavin looked at the dog. saw the same rigid tension he'd seen in young soldiers on their first night watch, the fear that if they blinked, the enemy would breach the wire. "It's okay, buddy," Gavin murmured, voice dropping to a low rumble. "You did your job. You got them to the extraction point." Buddy looked at Gavin. Amber eyes were searching, intelligent. He seemed to be weighing Gavin's soul, testing his capability. "I've got the watch now," Gavin said, inching the meat closer. "I'm the relief. You can stand down." Slowly, painfully slowly, Buddy stretched his neck forward, took the jerky from Gavin's fingers with incredible gentleness, teeth barely grazing the skin. He didn't gulp it down. Chewed methodically, eyes never leaving Gavin's face. Gavin reached out and rested his hand on the thick ruff of fur around the dog's neck. Felt muscles bunch up, then slowly relax under his touch. Found the spot behind the ears where fur was softest and began to scratch gently. "That's it," Gavin whispered. "Good boy." Taylor watched them, mesmerized. "How do you know that?" she asked. "How do you know what he's thinking?" Gavin didn't look up. He fed Buddy another piece of jerky. "Because I've been there. When you come out of a place where everyone wants to kill you, you don't just turn it off. The silence is louder than the noise. You feel like if you close your eyes, you'll wake up back in the mud." He looked at the scar running down Buddy's shoulder, an old one, underneath the fresh cuts from the glass. He's seen things. He's been hurt before, but he keeps doing the job because he loves you. That's his purpose. Gavin saw a shift in Buddy's posture. The dog was leaning into Gavin's hand now, seeking the contact. Frantic energy was ebbing away, replaced by heavy, drugged weariness. But the dog was fighting it, jerking his head up every time his eyes started to close. "He needs permission," Gavin said. He stood up and walked to the window overlooking the driveway, closed the heavy wooden shutters, and dropped the iron bar across them with a solid, reassuring thud. Did the same for the kitchen window, then walked back to the front door, checked the deadbolt one last time, and turned to the dog. He stood tall, assuming a posture of command. Snapped his fingers to get the dog's full attention. "Buddy," Gavin said, tone sharp and clear. The dog's ears pricked up. He struggled to get his paws under him, ready to spring. Gavin pointed to the rug in front of the fire, between the sofa and the door. A strategic spot, warm but central. "Guard," Gavin commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Buddy looked at the spot, looked at the shuttered windows, then looked at Gavin. He seemed to understand that the responsibility had been shared. The perimeter was secure. The commander had spoken. The dog let out a long, groaning sigh. He limped over to the rug. Didn't collapse, circled twice, creating his nest, then lowered himself down with dignity. He rested his chin on his front paws, eyes facing the door. But for the first time, the frantic swiveling of his ears stopped. Within seconds, his breathing deepened. Eyelids drooped, finally closed. "He's asleep," Taylor whispered, tears welling in her eyes again. "Thank you." Gavin sat in the armchair opposite them, rifle leaning against the wall within easy reach. He picked up his own piece of jerky and took a bite, watching the rise and fall of the dog's flank. "He's a good soldier," Gavin said quietly. As the fire crackled and the storm raged outside. A silent understanding settled over the room. They were a motley unit, a broken mother, a sleeping child, a haunted old man, and a wounded dog. But for tonight, they were a team, and for the first time in a very long time, Gavin didn't feel the crushing weight of solitude. He felt the familiar, heavy burden of duty. And strangely, it felt like coming home. Part 6. The Predator's circle dawn broke over Route 201, not with warmth, but with cold, steely gray light filtering weakly through retreating storm clouds. The blizzard had finally exhausted itself. leaving behind a world sculpted in silence and white dot at the bottom of the ravine. The silence was broken by the crunch of heavy boots on frozen snow. Declan stood beside the overturned black sedan, breath venting in calm, rhythmic plumes of vapor. He was a man who moved with economy of motion, wearing a high-end tactical winter coat that looked civilian but cost more than most people's cars. He surveyed the wreckage with eyes terrifyingly devoid of emotion. The car was empty. Doors had been pried open. Snow around the vehicle was trampled, telling a chaotic story of survival and extraction. "They aren't here," Vince called out from the tree line, holding a suppressed carbine, scanning the ridge. No bodies. No blood trail leading into the woods. Declan didn't answer immediately. He crouched by the passenger side door, ran a gloved hand over the shattered window frame, noted the footprints leading away, one set of small boots, one set of women's shoes, and a third set. Large, heavy tread. A man's boots and paw prints. Massive ones. "Someone picked them up," Declan said, voice low and smooth. "A local." He stood and began to walk the perimeter of the scene, eyes scanning the ground with precision of a hawk. He wasn't looking for the survivors. He was looking for the person who took them. He followed the tracks up the steep slope of the ravine. Difficult climb, even without carrying injured passengers. Whoever did this possessed significant physical strength. When Declan reached the roadway, he stopped. The wind had scrubbed much of the asphalt clean during the night, but the shoulder was still deep in snow. There, etched clearly into the white bank, were deep, aggressive ruts of a heavy truck. Wheelbase was wide. Tires oversized. "Ford or Chevy," Kruger grunted, coming up beside him. "Older model. Heavy duty?" Declan looked at the tracks. They turned sharply, heading north deeper into the wilderness, but before he turned to follow them, something caught his eye, near the spot where the truck had evidently idled. There was a small rectangular depression in the snow. A glint of silver sparkled faintly in gray morning light. Declan bent down, brushed loose powder away, and picked up the object. Thought it was a Zippo lighter. The metal was cold against his glove, old, silver casing scratched, and worn smooth at the edges from years of handling. He flipped it over. On the front, there was an emblem etched into the metal, not a store-bought design. A unit insignia. A skull, paddle, and parachute. Below the image, a date was engraved, 1985, and a name, Jack. Declan's eyes narrowed. He knew this insignia. 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, Marine Corps. This wasn't just a lighter. It was a totem, a memento of service. He flicked the lid open and struck the wheel. A strong, steady flame erupted, defying the biting wind. "We aren't dealing with a good Samaritan," Declan said, snapping the lighter shut with a sharp metallic click. He turned to look at Kruger and Vince. "We're dealing with a veteran. Likely combat experienced. Recon." Kruger scoffed, shifting his weight. "So some old guy playing hero?" "We have the numbers. Veterans like this don't play hero, Kruger," Declan said coldly. "They play war. They understand terrain. They understand fortification. And they understand fatal funnels." He slipped the lighter into his pocket. If he kept this lighter for nearly 40 years, he's sentimental. But if he dropped it, he was distracted. That's his weakness. Declan pointed toward the tire tracks fading into the north. "Follow those tracks," he ordered. "But stay sharp. Do not engage blindly. If he hears us coming, he will have the ground prepared. We track him to his hole, and then we flush him out." 5 miles away, the morning air was crisp and painfully cold. Gavin Mercer stood at the junction, where his private logging road met the main highway. He'd hiked down from the cabin on snowshoes, leaving Buddy to guard Taylor and Mia. He needed to know if the plow had come by, or worse. If anyone else had, the silence of the woods was absolute. Snow muffled everything, creating a sense of isolation that usually brought Gavin peace. Today, it brought only gnawing anxiety. He surveyed the intersection. Maine Road was still untouched by county plows, but as he looked at the entrance to his own property, his stomach dropped. The ruts from his truck the night before were still visible, frozen ridges of mud and ice cutting through pristine white. They were like neon arrows pointing straight to his sanctuary, but that wasn't what made his blood run cold. There were fresh tracks on top of his, narrower than his truck's tires. Tread pattern modern and expensive. An SUV. The vehicle had pulled into the entrance of his road, stopped, and then backed out, turning around. Scouts thought someone had come here. Checked the entrance. Confirmed that a vehicle had entered recently, and then retreated to report, or perhaps they were waiting just down the bend. Gavin's heart began to hammer against his ribs. They knew. They'd found the site, seen the lack of bodies, and deduced the rest. Instinctively, Gavin's hand went to his jacket pocket. He needed the grounding touch of his Zippo, needed to rub his thumb over Jack's name, a ritual he performed whenever fear threatened to cloud his judgment. His fingers grasped at empty. Camper's dog. Gavin stopped breathing. He shoved his hand deeper, frantically digging into the seams. Nothing. He checked the other pocket. Empty. Checked his flannel shirt pocket. Jeans. Gone. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He closed his eyes, mind racing back to the night before. The wind. The snow. He bent over to look at the dog. The jacket had bunched up. It must have slid out then. He'd left it at the crash site. Gavin opened his eyes and stared at the dark tree line. He hadn't just left the lighter. He'd left his identity. That Zippo was distinct. Anyone with military knowledge would recognize the unit. And if they were professionals, which the severed brake line suggested they now knew exactly who they were hunting. He wasn't facing a chaotic search party. He was facing an enemy who knew he was a soldier. They would come prepared. They wouldn't knock on the door. They would come in heavy. Stupid, Gavin hissed to himself, the word forming a cloud of vapor. Stupid old man. He looked back up the winding trail toward the cabin. He'd left a woman, a child, and a dog up there, thinking they were safe because of the storm, but he did practically signed his name in the snow for the killers to find. He turned and began to run. Running in snowshoes was awkward and exhausting, but Gavin forced his legs to move, ignoring the burn in his lungs. He had to get back. He had to fortify. The element of surprise was gone. The predator had identified the prey, and the hunt was already underway. Part 7. The siege. Gavin burst through the front door of the cabin, bringing a gust of freezing air and snow. He slammed the heavy oak door shut and immediately threw the iron deadbolt, the metal sliding home with a sound of finality. Taylor Corves jerked upright on the sofa, clutching Mia to her chest. Fear in her eyes was sharp and immediate. She saw the change in Gavin instantly. The weary, gentle rescuer from the night before was gone. In his place stood a man with eyes like flint and a jaw set in grim determination. "What is it?" Taylor asked, voice trembling. "Did you see them?" "They found the crash site," Gavin said, voice clipped and efficient as he moved to the window. He peered through the crack in the shutters before closing them tight and dropping the wooden locking bar into place. "And they found something of mine. A lighter. It had my unit insignia on it." He turned to face her. "They know I'm not just a local hermit. They know I have training. That means they won't come knocking. They'll come to breach." Taylor's face went pale. "What do we do?" "We dig in," Gavin said. He moved to the center of the room, shoving the heavy coffee table aside, grabbed the edge of the large woven rug that covered the floorboards, and pulled it back, revealing a trapdoor set flush into the wood. It was built of thick pine planks with a recessed iron ring for a handle. Gavin hauled it open. A draft of cold, earthy air rose from the darkness below. "The root cellar," Gavin explained. "It's dug 6 feet into the earth. The walls are stone and dirt. It's the safest place in the cabin. If bullets start flying, nothing gets through down there." Mia whimpered, looking into the dark hole. "I don't want to go down there. It's scary." Gavin knelt, bringing himself to Mia's eye level. He didn't offer false comfort. He offered a mission. "Mia, listen to me. This cabin is a castle, okay? And that down there is the keep. It's where the most important people hide while the knights protect the walls. I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that?" Mia looked at him, lip trembling. But she nodded. Gavin looked at Taylor. "Take the blankets. Take the water jug. Once you're down there, you bolt this door from the inside. Do not open it for anyone but me. If you hear shouting, if you hear shooting, you stay quiet. Understand?" Taylor hesitated, looking at the trapdoor, then at Gavin. "What about you? You can't fight them alone." Gavin glanced at the German shepherd standing by the fireplace. Buddy was watching the frantic activity with intense focus, body rigid, ears tracking Gavin's every movement. "I'm not alone," Gavin said softly. He helped them down the narrow wooden ladder. The cellar was cramped, smelling of potatoes and damp earth. But it was solid. Once they were settled on the pallet of storage crates, Gavin handed Taylor a heavy flashlight. "Keep it off unless you absolutely need it," he instructed. "Gavin," Taylor whispered, looking up at him through the square opening. "Come back for us." "I will," he promised. He lowered the trap door, heard the faint scrape of the slide bolt engaging from below. Then he kicked the heavy rug back over the wood, smoothing it out to hide the seam. Now the cabin was a fortress. Gavin moved quickly. He overturned the heavy oak dining table and pushed it against the front door, creating a secondary barricade. He took his hunting rifle from the rack, checked the action, loaded a fresh magazine, placed a box of ammunition on the table. Then he walked to the foot of his bed. In the corner of the room sat an old, battered steamer trunk, its brass fittings tarnished by time. It was the repository of a life Gavin had tried to leave behind. He unlocked it. The smell that drifted up was a mix of mothballs, old canvas, and the distinct metallic scent of the military. Inside lay uniforms folded with precision, a beret, medals in a velvet box. And at the very bottom, a piece of equipment he hadn't touched since 1980-9. It was a past ballistic vest. The camouflage pattern was woodland, fabric faded, but the Kevlar inserts inside were still thick and stiff. It was heavy, designed for a human torso, bulky and restrictive. Gavin pulled it out, testing its weight. It felt familiar in his hands, a reminder of days when he wore 18 pounds of gear as a second skin. He turned to Buddy. "Front and center," Gavin said, voice low and commanding. The dog trotted over immediately, sitting at attention in front of Gavin. Buddy's gaze was fixed on the vest. His tail gave a single short wag, but his demeanor was serious. He recognized the ritual of gearing up. He knew what it meant when the harnesses came out. Gavin knelt on one knee. "This isn't going to be a perfect fit, pal," he muttered, unfolding the vest. "But it'll cover what matters." He placed the heavy vest over the dog's back. It draped over Buddy like a saddle, side panels hanging low. It was far too big. Gavin wasn't. Deterred, he reached into his tool drawer and pulled out a roll of heavy-duty black duct tape and a spool of nylon cord. He began to modify the armor, folded the excess material under the dog's belly, pulling Kevlar panels tight against Buddy's ribcage to protect the heart and lungs. Used nylon cord to lash the shoulder straps together so they wouldn't slide down the dog's legs. Wrap duct tape around the midsection, cinching the vest securely. Buddy didn't flinch. He stood statue still, lifting his legs when Gavin needed him to, allowing the man to manipulate the heavy armor around his body. The dog seemed to expand into the gear, chest puffing out, neck arching. He wasn't bothered by the weight or restriction. If anything, the pressure of the vest seemed to focus him. When Gavin was finished, Buddy looked like a tank. The camouflage vest covered his back and sides, transforming the sleek animal into a weapon of war. Gavin grabbed a roll of medical tape and wrapped his own forearms, tightening his bootlaces. Then he picked up his rifle and stood. He looked down. Buddy looked up, amber eyes burning with fierce, intelligent light. There was no fear there anymore. The anxiety from the storm, the confusion of the crash, it was all gone. Buddy had a job now. He was back in the fight. Gavin reached down and gripped the handle of the vest on Buddy's back, giving it a solid shake to test the fit. It held firm. "We aren't running," Gavin said to the dog, voice rough with emotion. "And we aren't hiding." He knelt again, grabbing the sides of Buddy's head with both hands, forcing the dog to look him in the eye. It was an intimate moment, a transfer of will from man to beast. "They're coming for the girl," Gavin whispered. "But to get to her, they have to go through us." Buddy let out a low, rumbling growl, baring his teeth slightly. It was a promise of violence. "We fight together," Gavin said. "You and me. We hold the line." He released the dog and stood up. "Guard," Gavin commanded, pointing to the shadows beside the barricaded front door. Buddy moved instantly. The heavy vest didn't slow him down. It made him move with more purpose. He took his position in the blind spot next to the entrance, body coiled, eyes fixed on the wooden planks that separated them from the enemy. Gavin took his position at the side window, peering through a narrow slit in the shutter. The woods outside were silent, but it was a deceptive silence. The birds had stopped singing. The wind had died down. The enemy was close. Gavin could feel it in his old bones, the same way he used to feel it in the jungle. He rubbed his thumb against his empty pocket, missing the Zippo. But then he looked at the dog. Buddy was a gray and white statue in armor, breathing steadily, ready to die on command. Gavin tightened his grip on the rifle. He didn't need the lighter. He had his fire right here. The sun had long since vanished behind the western ridge, leaving the cabin wrapped in a suffocating blanket of heavy gray clouds. Inside, the single overhead bulb flickering above the kitchen table cast long, wavering shadows against the log walls. The hum of the propane generator outside was a steady, rhythmic heartbeat, the only thing keeping the encroaching winter night at bay. Gavin sat in a wooden chair pressed into the darkest corner of the room, rifle resting across his knees. Breathing was slow and measured, synchronized with the rise and fall of the dog lying at his feet. Buddy, encased in his improvised Kevlar vest, was a statue of concentration. Chin rested on front paws, but eyes were wide open. Ears twitched independently, scanning frequencies of the forest that Gavin's aging human ears could not detect. Suddenly, the rhythmic hum of the generator faltered. It gave a wet, choking cough, sputtered once, and died. The overhead light vanished instantly. The cabin plunged into absolute, crushing darkness. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was sudden and violent. Electric warmth of baseboard heaters began to fade immediately, replaced by creeping chill of storm-battered walls. "Stay," Gavin whispered into the blackness. He didn't move. He'd expected this. Cutting the power was the first page of the siege playbook, designed to disorient, to instill panic, to force the prey to make a mistake. But Gavin Mercer did not panic. He closed his eyes, letting his pupils dilate, though there was little ambient light to gather. He reached down, rough hand finding the sturdy, armored shoulder of the German Shepherd. Under the thick vest, he felt Buddy's muscles tense. The dog had not flinched when the lights died. He was already operating in a world defined by scent and sound, not sight. From the tree line, a voice shattered the silence. It was amplified, distorted by a loudspeaker echoing off the frozen trunks of the pines with a metallic, hollow quality. Gavin Mercer. The name hung in the freezing air. Gavin tightened his grip on the rifle stock but remained silent. "We know you're in there," the voice continued, smooth and arrogant. It was the leader, the man Gavin had identified in his mind as the predator. "And we know what you are, or rather what you used to be." There was a pause, filled only by wind whistling through the eaves. "I found your lighter, Sergeant. 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, 1985. A long time ago. A different war." Gavin's jaw clenched. Hearing his unit, his history, spoken by this faceless enemy felt like a violation. "And Jack," the voice went on, tone dropping to feigned sadness. "Who was Jack, Gavin?" The name's etched right here on the metal. "Was he a friend you saved? Or was he someone you left behind in the mud?" The words were precise daggers aimed at the scar tissue of Gavin's soul. The man outside was trying to goad him, to make him angry, to make him reckless. He wanted Gavin to shout back, to reveal his position, to waste ammunition firing blindly into the trees. Gavin remained, stone still. He moved his hand from Buddy's shoulder to the side of the dog's neck. He could feel a low vibration building in the animal's throat, a growl so deep it was almost. INFRASON. I see. Buddy was reacting to the hostility in the voice. But he held his position. "Give us the girl and her mother," the voice bargained, the mockery vanishing. "And you can keep your memories. You can keep your little fortress. Refuse, and you join Jack." The loudspeaker clicked off. The silence returned, heavier than before. Now the real game began. The monologue was the distraction. The movement would come next. Gavin slid out of the chair, moving with silent grace of a predator. He crouched on the floorboards next to Buddy. In this pitch blackness, Gavin was effectively blind. He could not see the windows, could not see the door. If they breached now, he'd be shooting at shadows. "Buddy," Gavin breathed, mouth inches from the dog's ear. "Watch." He placed his left hand lightly on the dog's flank, just behind the armor. This was their communication line. He didn't need to see. He needed to feel what the dog felt. Minutes stretched into eternity. The wind rattled the loose shutter on the east window. A branch scraped against the roof like a skeletal finger. Then he felt it. Buddy's head snapped to the left. Muscles in his neck turned rigid as steel cable. The vibration in his throat spiked, a sharp warning rumble that stopped just short of a bark. His ears were swiveled forward, pinpointing a sound outside the heavy log wall. Someone was approaching the southwest corner. Gavin didn't question the dog, didn't wait to hear the crunch of snow himself. He trusted the animal's senses more than his own life. He shifted his body, swinging the barrel of the hunting rifle to the left, aiming blindly into the darkness toward the southwest wall. Just below window level, he visualized the layout of the yard outside. The approach vector. He waited. Buddy's growl intensified, the vibration traveling up Gavin's arm. The dog shifted his weight forward, ready to launch. The enemy was close. Right against the wall. Gavin pulled the trigger. The rifle report was deafening in the enclosed space, a thunderclap that slammed against eardrums. The muzzle flash illuminated the room for a split second in a strobe of blinding white light, revealing the overturned table, the barricaded door, and the snarling, armored visage of the German shepherd. From outside, a shout of surprise and pain erupted, followed by frantic scrabble of boots slipping on ice. "Back! Get back!" A voice screamed from the darkness. Gavin worked the bolt of the rifle, the mechanical clack-clack sounding loud and lethal. He didn't fire again. Didn't need to. The bullet had punched through the wood and insulation, missing the intruder by inches or perhaps grazing him. The message was clear. "I can see you." Silence descended again. But the tension had ratcheted up. They knew he wasn't cowering. Gavin waited, hand back on Buddy's flank. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the freezing air. 5 minutes passed. Then Buddy's head swung slowly to the right toward the kitchen side of the cabin. Ears twitched, tracking a moving target. Someone was circling, trying to find a blind spot. Buddy's body turned, following the sound. He gave a sharp, huffing exhalation, not a growl, but an alert. Gavin pivoted on his knees, realigning the rifle. He trusted the geometry of the dog's gaze. Even in the dark, if Buddy was looking there, the threat was there. The intruder outside moved with care, likely crawling now, trying to stay below the window line. But they couldn't hide their scent. And they couldn't silence the friction of fabric against snow. Buddy let out a sharp warning bark, a singular, explosive sound that commanded attention. Gavin fired immediately. He aimed high this time, sending a round through the upper shutter of the kitchen window. Wood splintered. Glass behind the shutter shattered with a cascading crash. "Damn it!" A voice cursed from the side yard. "He has night vision. Pull back! Pull back!" Gavin permitted himself a grim, unseen smile in the dark. He didn't have night vision goggles. He had something better. He had a partner who could hear a heartbeat at 50 paces. He felt Buddy relax slightly, the rigid tension leaving the dog's spine. The immediate threat had retreated. The enemy had probed the perimeter and found it stinging. "Good boy," Gavin whispered, stroking the thick fur along Buddy's neck. "Good boy." Buddy licked Gavin's hand once rough and warm, then immediately returned his chin to his paws. He wasn't celebrating. He was resetting. The first wave was broken, but the night was long, and the phantoms in the woods were far from finished. Part 8. The Last Stand and Redemption. The standoff following the retreat of the first wave had stretched the silence in the cabin to a breaking point. The air grew steadily colder as heat dissipated. Gavin remained in his crouch, hand resting lightly on Buddy's flank. Both man and dog frozen in a tableau of waiting. It began not with a sound, but with a smell. Buddy's head snapped up first, nose twitching violently. A low, menacing growl started deep in his chest, far more intense than the previous alerts. Gavin sniffed the air. It was subtle at first, a faint, acrid tang cutting through the smell of old wood smoke. Then it intensified, a sharp, metallic chemical odor that stung the nostrils. Smoke, not from fire, but something else. "Move," Gavin whispered. Before he could stand, the attack commenced. It didn't come from the windows. A series of muffled impacts hit the back wall of the cabin near the kitchen. Something heavy crashed through the side door, splintering wood and metal. Immediately, a dense, grayish-white cloud began to billow into the room, illuminated by a faint, eerie chemical glow from the canisters rolling on the floorboards. Tear gas, mixed with dense, obscuring smoke. "Gas!" Gavin shouted, though there was no one to hear him but the dog. He grabbed Buddy's harness and scrambled backward toward the center of the room, away from the point of entry. The smoke filled the cabin with terrifying speed, thick and suffocating. It stung Gavin's eyes, blinding him instantly, and tore at his throat, making every breath a coughing agony. Buddy was sneezing violently, shaking his head as the gas assaulted his sensitive nose. Yet he didn't run. He pressed his armored body against Gavin's leg, holding his ground. Through the swirling, opaque fog, shadows materialized. They were moving low and fast. 2 men wearing gas masks burst through the breached rear door, their forms indistinct and monstrous in the haze. Gavin raised his rifle, firing blindly toward the movement. The muzzle flash illuminated the smoke in a brief, blinding strobe revealing the armored figures for a split second before darkness returned. He heard a grunt of surprise, but the men kept coming. Before Gavin could cycle the bolt for another shot, a heavy weight slammed into him from the side. A third attacker had come through the front window. Gavin was thrown backward over the coffee table. The rifle knocked from his grasp. He hit the floor hard, wind knocked out of him. A heavy boot slammed onto his chest, pinning him down. Through his watering, burning eyes, Gavin looked up. A figure towered over him, the gas mask making him look inhuman. It was the man with the voice. Declan. Declan knelt, pressing his knee into Gavin's sternum. In his gloved hand, a combat knife glinted dully in the chemical light. "It ends here, old man," Declan hissed, voice muffled by the mask. He raised the knife, preparing to strike. Gavin struggled, hands scrabbling uselessly against the floorboards. He was pinned. He was going to die here, on his own floor. The thought of Taylor and Mia below, unprotected, flashed through his mind with agonizing clarity. Then a low, savage roar erupted from the smoke. It wasn't a bark. It was a primal sound of fury and defense. Buddy launched himself from the darkness. He moved like a missile, a blur of gray and white fur aimed not at the man pinning Gavin, but at the most immediate threat, the one holding a pistol, who just entered from the kitchen. Buddy slammed into the man, jaws clamping onto his right wrist with crushing force. The man screamed, a high, terrified sound. The pistol fell to the floor with a clatter. Buddy didn't let go. He shook his head violently, powerful neck muscles twisting the man's arm, breaking his grip and his will to fight. Declan, distracted by the attack on his man, turned his head. In that split second, he saw the dog savaging his subordinate. "No!" Declan shouted. He raised his own pistol, which he'd pulled with his left hand while holding the knife in his right. He aimed at the dog. "Buddy, down!" Gavin screamed, voice raw and desperate, but Buddy was locked onto his target, protecting his handler's flank. He didn't hear the command. Declan fired. The gunshot was deafening. Buddy let out a sharp yelp of pain. The impact of the bullet was visible. It struck him squarely in the side of the chest. The force of the round knocked the 70-pound animal sideways, tumbling him away from the man he was attacking. Buddy hit the wall with a heavy thud and slid to the floor, yelping again as he tried to stand. His back leg gave way. He collapsed, panting heavily, blood already beginning to stain the edges of the green Kevlar vest Gavin had, rigged for him. The side of the dog falling broke. Something inside Gavin. It was the same feeling he'd felt 30 years ago watching Jack fall in the mud. The same helpless rage, the same inability to stop the people he loved from getting hurt. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't 24 and scared. He was 62, and he was angry. A volcanic fury erupted within Gavin, a primal, protective rage that overrode the pain in his chest and the burning in his lungs. He roared, a sound that rivaled the dog's, and bucked his hips violently, throwing Declan off balance. Gavin didn't try to get up. He rolled, putting his entire body weight into a sweeping kick that took Declan's legs out from under him. Declan fell heavily, dropping the knife. Gavin was on him before he hit the floor. He was no longer fighting with skill or technique. He was fighting with pure, unadulterated fury. He grabbed Declan by the straps of his tactical vest and slammed him backward into the stone fireplace surround. Declan's head hit the stone with a sickening crack. His body went limp instantly. The gas mask was knocked askew. Gavin stood over him, breathing like a bellows, fists clenched. The other two intruders, seeing their leader down and faced with the berserk old man in the smoke, retreated through the broken kitchen door, dragging their injured comrade. Gavin didn't pursue them. The rage evaporated as quickly as it had come, replaced by sickening dread. He turned and stumbled through the thinning smoke toward the wall where Buddy lay. The dog was lying on his side. Breathing was shallow and rapid. Eyes were open, glazed with pain, looking up at Gavin. He gave a weak thump of his tail against the floorboards. Gavin knelt beside him, hands shaking uncontrollably. "Buddy," he whispered, voice cracking. "Hey, pal. Stay with me." He reached out and gently unbuckled the straps of the improvised vest. Peeled back the heavy Kevlar panel. There on the dog's flank was a dark bruise rapidly forming, centered around a small, angry red abrasion where the skin was broken. The bullet hadn't penetrated. The outdated, ill-fitting vest, combined with the angle of the shot, had stopped the round dot. It had knocked the wind out of him, maybe cracked a rib. But it hadn't gone through. Gavin slumped against the wall, tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. He placed his hand on Buddy's neck, feeling the strong, steady pulse beneath the fur. "You're okay," Gavin choked out, burying his face in the dog's neck. "You're okay? You took the hit. You took the hit for me." Buddy licked the side of Gavin's face, a slow, rough swipe of his tongue. He whined softly, nudging Gavin's arm with his nose. Gavin looked down at the dog. The animal had thrown himself into the line of fire without hesitation. He'd honored the silent pact they'd made. They were no longer just a man and a dog brought together by chance. They were bound by blood and battle. Gavin helped Buddy sit up. The dog winced but managed to get his front paws under him. "We hold the line," Gavin whispered, repeating the promise he'd made earlier. He looked around the wrecked cabin, at the unconscious man by the fireplace, and then back at the dog who'd saved his life. "And we don't leave anyone behind." The silence that followed the violence was shattered by a cacophony of light and sound. Blue and red strobes swept rhythmically across the interior of the cabin, painting the log walls in frantic, alternating colors. The wail of sirens, which had been a distant whine moments ago, now screamed directly outside, accompanied by the crunch of heavy tires on snow and the shouting of men. Gavin sat on the floor, back against the wall, one hand resting on Buddy's neck. The dog was panting, tongue lolling out, but his head was up watching the door with a steady, unblinking gaze. The makeshift Kevlar vest was still strapped to his chest. Scuffed and dusty, a testament to the battle they'd survived. The front door, already damaged, swung open. A beam of bright tactical light cut through the lingering smoke. "State police. Drop any weapons." "Clear," Gavin called out, voice rasping. "Weapon is safe on the table. Subject is secured." Sergeant Porter stepped into the room. His breath vented in clouds of steam. He was a bear of a man, wearing the gray uniform of the Maine State Troopers and a heavy parka. He lowered his service weapon when he saw Gavin. He took in the scene quickly to overturned furniture. The shattered window, the unconscious man zip-tied by the fireplace, and the old soldier sitting on the floor with the dog. "Mercer," Porter breathed, holstering his gun. "When Rusty called it in, I thought he was exaggerating. Looks like you fought a war in here." "Just holding the line, Sergeant," Gavin replied wearily. Patted Buddy's flank. "Had some help." Porter signaled to the paramedics rushing in behind him. "Check the cellar. The woman and kid are down there. Get this trash," he gestured to Declan, "out of here and into the wagon." As the cabin filled with the chaotic efficiency of law enforcement, another figure entered. He didn't look like the troopers. He wore a long black wool coat over a sharp suit, utterly impractical for the Maine wilderness, and his shoes were polished leather. He moved with clipped, bureaucratic urgency. "Agent Shaw, FBI," the man announced, flashing a badge. He scanned the room, eyes lingering on Gavin for only a second before dismissing him as a local asset. "Where is the witness? Where is Taylor Corpse?" "She's coming up," Gavin said, pointing to the trap door being lifted by a trooper. Taylor emerged from the cellar. Clutching Mia, she looked exhausted, face streaked with dirt and tears, but she was alive. When she saw Gavin, she broke away from the paramedic trying to check her pulse and ran to him. She dropped to her knees, hugging him fiercely. "You saved us," she sobbed into his flannel shirt. "You saved us." Gavin awkwardly patted her back, conscious of the FBI agent watching impatiently. "We got lucky, ma'am. That's all." Agent Shaw stepped forward. "Mrs. Corpse, I'm relieved you're safe. However, we have a very narrow window. With Declan in custody, the rest of the syndicate will scramble. We need to move you immediately. The helicopter is grounded due to weather, but my vehicle is armored. We're taking you straight to a secure facility in Massachusetts." Taylor pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Now? Can't we rest?" "Now," Shaw said, voice not unkind but entirely inflexible. "You're entering the Federal Witness Protection Program, effective immediately. That means new identities, new locations, and zero contact with your past life. We have to disappear you before the sun comes up." Taylor nodded slowly, the reality of her situation sinking in. She looked down at Mia, then at Gavin, and finally at Buddy. "Come on, Buddy," she whispered, snapping her fingers. "Let's go, boy." Buddy stood up. He winced slightly as his bruised ribs shifted, but he shook himself off. He looked at Gavin, waiting for a command. Gavin felt a hollow ache open up in his chest, wider and deeper than any wound. This was it. The mission was over. The assets were safe. And now they were leaving. He would go back to being the crazy old hermit in the woods, talking to ghosts that never answered. "Go on," Gavin said softly to the dog. He nudged Buddy gently. "Go with her." Mission complete. Buddy hesitated. He looked at Gavin, then at Taylor. Slowly, he dipped his head and walked to Taylor's side. She clipped a spare leash onto his collar, not the tactical harness Gavin had rigged, but a simple nylon lead she'd salvaged from her purse. "Thank you, Gavin," Taylor said, voice trembling. "For everything." "Just keep your head down," Gavin said, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "And keep moving." Agent Shaw ushered them toward the door. "Let's move. Porter, secure the perimeter until we're clear." Gavin stood up, knees popping. He watched them leave. He felt a sudden, desperate urge to call out, to ask them to stay for just a cup of coffee, just an hour. But he swallowed it down. He was a soldier. Soldiers didn't cling. He walked to the doorway, leaning against the frame to watch them go. The snow had stopped falling. The first hint of gray dawn was touching the tops of the pines. A black FBI Suburban sat idling in the driveway, exhaust puffing white clouds into the air. Taylor opened the rear door of the SUV. She lifted Mia inside and buckled her in. Then she turned to the dog. "Up, Buddy," she commanded, patting the leather seat. "Load up." Buddy stood at the base of the open door. He looked into the dark, sterile interior of the vehicle. It smelled of cleaning chemicals and unfamiliar men. He didn't move. "Buddy, come on," Taylor urged, tugging on the leash. "We have to go." Buddy planted his feet, lowered his head. Ears flattened. He let out a low, stubborn whine. "Is there a problem?" Agent Shaw asked from the driver's seat, checking his watch. "We're burning daylight, Mrs. Corves." "He won't get in," Taylor said, frustration rising in her voice. She pulled harder. "Muddy Hill." "Load up," but he backed away. The collar tightened around his neck, but he refused to yield. He backed up until he was clear of the door swing, then sat down in the snow. He looked back toward the cabin. He looked at Gavin. Gavin stood on the porch, heart hammering. "He's just confused," Gavin called out, voice sounding thin in the cold air. He stepped off the porch and limped through the snow toward the truck. "Let me help." Gavin approached the dog. He expected to grab the collar, to help shove the animal into the car, to do the right thing. But as he got close, Buddy stood up. He didn't move toward the car. He moved toward Gavin. The dog walked straight to Gavin's side, turned around so he was facing the SUV, positioning himself between Gavin and the federal agents. He pressed his body firmly against Gavin's leg, a solid, warm weight dot. He let out a long, heavy sigh and leaned his entire weight against the man dot. It was the lean, the definitive gesture of a German shepherd claiming his person. "Buddy." "No," Gavin whispered, though his hand instinctively dropped to rest on the dog's head. "You have to go. You have to take care of them." Gavin looked at Taylor. "Call him," he said. "Use his command voice." Taylor stood by the open car door, the leash slack in her hand. She looked at the dog, saw the way Buddy was leaning against Gavin's leg, the way his amber eyes were fixed on the horizon guarding the old man, not her. She remembered her husband, Marcus. Marcus had loved Buddy, trained him, fed him. But Buddy had always been a subordinate to Marcus. He obeyed. He worked. But he'd never looked at Marcus the way he was leaning on Gavin. Right now, this wasn't obedience. This was partnership. Buddy had found a fellow broken soldier. And he'd made his choice. Tears spilled over Taylor's cheeks. She looked at Gavin, a man who had nothing, who lived in a cabin full of ghosts, who'd risked his life for strangers, and she realized she couldn't take the one thing that had brought the light back into his eyes. "No." Taylor whispered. She unclipped the leash from Buddy's collar. "Mrs. Corpse," Agent Shaw barked. "What are you doing?" "He's not coming," Taylor said, voice gaining strength. She coiled the leash in her hand and walked over to Gavin. "Taylor, you can't," Gavin protested, stepping back. "He's your dog. He's Mia's protector." "He was," Taylor said, smiling through her tears. "But he's retired now, and he's chosen his retirement home." She reached out and took Gavin's hand, placing the coiled leash into his palm, closed his fingers around it. "He never leaned on Marcus like that," she said softly. "He knows who he belongs to, Gavin. He found you in the storm for a reason." Gavin looked down at the dog. Buddy looked up, tail giving a slow, rhythmic thump against Gavin's leg. The dog didn't look torn, didn't look conflicted. He looked settled. I don't have much," Gavin stammered. "I can't give him a fancy life." "You can give him what he needs," Taylor said. "A pack. A purpose." She leaned in and kissed Gavin on the cheek. "Thank you for saving all of us." Then she knelt down one last time and hugged Buddy around the neck. "Be a good boy," she whispered into his fur. "Take care of him." She stood up, wiped her face, and walked back to the SUV, climbed in and shut the door. Gavin stood in the driveway, the leash clutched in his hand, feeling the warmth of the dog against his leg. He watched as the black SUV reversed, turned around, and began to make its way down the snowy track following the state trooper's cruiser. Mia waved from the back window, small hand pressed against the glass. Gavin lifted his hand and waved back. He stood there until the tail lights disappeared around the bend, leaving him alone in the silence of the Maine morning. But the silence didn't feel heavy anymore, didn't feel crushing. Gavin looked down. Buddy was still leaning against him, watching the road where the car had vanished. After a moment, the dog looked up at Gavin, tilted his head, and let out a soft woof. "Yeah," Gavin choked out, voice thick with emotion. He knelt down in the snow and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, burying his face in the thick silver-gray fur. "Yeah, I know. We're okay." The sun finally crested the ridge, bathing the snow-covered valley in brilliant golden light. It touched the old man and the dog, casting two long shadows that merged into one. "Come on, partner," Gavin said, standing up and wiping his eyes with the back of his dirty glove. "Let's go home. I think I have some more jerky inside." Buddy barked a happy, unrestricted sound and trotted toward the cabin door, waiting for Gavin to open it. The iron grip of the Maine winter did not let go easily. But when it finally broke, it did so with spectacular surrender. By early May, the relentless white drifts that had buried Gavin Mercer's world for months had receded, replaced by the damp, rich browns of thawing earth and the vibrant, shocking green of new moss. The silence of the snow was gone, usurped by the sound of rushing water as 1,000 tiny creeks woke up and tumbled down the mountain toward the sound of rushing water as 1,000 tiny creeks woke up and tumbled down the mountain toward the Mountain. Penobscot River. Gavin stepped out onto the porch of the log cabin, a mug of steaming black coffee in his hand. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with air that smelled of pine needles, wet soil, and promise. He wore a lighter jacket today, the heavy leather coat hanging on the hook inside retired until November. "All clear," Gavin murmured to the morning dot behind him. The screen door pushed open with a familiar creak. Buddy stepped out, claws clicking rhythmically on the wooden planks. The German shepherd paused to stretch, extending his front paws and bowing deep a groan of satisfaction, vibrating in his throat. 3 months had transformed the dog. The ribs that had once pressed against his skin were now covered in lean muscle and a coat that shone like burnished silver in the sun. The patch of fur on his flank where the bullet had struck the vest had grown back slightly darker. A permanent badge of honor. He still favored his right hind leg slightly, a lingering stiffness from the battle in the cabin. But it didn't slow him down. It just gave him a rolling, purposeful gait that matched Gavin's own stiff-kneed walk. "You ready, partner?" Gavin asked, looking down. Buddy looked up, tail sweeping a slow, steady arc against the porch railing. He offered a soft, huffing sound, eyes bright and expectant. "All right, then," Gavin said, setting his coffee mug on the railing. "Let's go pay the rent." They set off down the trail leading away from the driveway, moving deeper into the woods behind the cabin. The path was narrow and steep, winding through a cathedral of ancient HEMLOCKs. In the past, Gavin had walked this trail like a ghost haunting his own land. Head down, consumed by the noise of 1980-5. Today, he walked with his head up. He watched Buddy work. The dog didn't just walk, he patrolled. He moved 10 yards ahead, checking the brush, sniffing the wind, ears swiveling to track the chatter of squirrels and the distant call of a raven. Every few minutes, Buddy would stop, turn his head, and make eye contact with Gavin. It was a check-in. "I'm here. You okay?" "Good." Moving on. It was a conversation without words, a language of trust they built over 100 quiet evenings by the fire and 1,000 miles on these trails. They climbed steadily for 40 minutes, until the trees began to thin. The air grew cooler as they gained altitude, biting slightly at Gavin's exposed face. They reached a small clearing, a rocky outcropping that offered a commanding view of the valley below. To the east, the sun was just beginning to crest the distant mountains, setting the horizon on fire with hues of violet and gold. In the center of the clearing stood a simple cairn, a pyramid of rough, gray river stones that Gavin had stacked by hand years ago. It wasn't a formal grave. There was no body beneath the soil. It was a memorial, a place for a soldier who'd never come home. Gavin approached the stones slowly, but he sensed the change in mood. He stopped his patrol and trotted back to Gavin's side, pressing his shoulder against Gavin's leg. Gavin reached into his pocket and pulled out the Zippo lighter. Sergeant Porter had returned. it 2 weeks after the raid, slipping it into Gavin's hand with a knowing nod. After the district attorney had finished processing the evidence against Declan's syndicate, the lighter felt heavy in Gavin's palm, heavier than a few ounces of steel and flint should feel. It held the weight of the jungle, the weight of the mud, and the weight of the guilt that had kept Gavin imprisoned in his own mind for decades. He ran his thumb over the engraving one last time. Jack, 1985, for 39 years. Gavin had carried this lighter as a penance. He believed that saving it meant he hadn't completely failed. He'd thought that if he kept the flame alive, he kept Jack's memory alive. But looking at it now in the sharp, clear light of spring, Gavin realized the truth. The lighter wasn't the memorial. It was an anchor. It was the thing keeping him trapped in that rainy depression, forever waiting for a chopper that was 5 minutes late. He looked down at Buddy. The dog was watching him with a calm, steady gaze. Buddy didn't know about Jack, didn't know about wars or guilt. He only knew that Gavin had stood his ground when it mattered. He knew that when the monsters came, Gavin hadn't run. Gavin had saved Taylor. He'd saved Mia, and he'd saved Buddy. The ledger was balanced. The debt that Gavin had been paying with his own happiness for half a lifetime was finally cleared. Gavin knelt in front of the stone cairn. The moss was already beginning to reclaim the bottom rocks, softening the edges. "Hey, Jack," Gavin whispered, voice carried away by the mountain breeze. He didn't feel the usual crushing constriction in his chest. He just felt a quiet, melancholy peace. "I found a new unit," Gavin said, glancing at the dog. "He's a good soldier. You would have liked him. He's stubborn, like you." Gavin placed the silver Zippo on a flat stone near the top of the cairn. The metal glinted in the sunlight, bright and sharp against the weathered gray rock. "I'm done carrying this, Jack," Gavin said softly. "I'm leaving it here with you. You keep the fire. I've got to go live now." He kept his hand on the lighter for a second longer, a final goodbye, and then he pulled away. "Debt paid," Gavin stated firmly. He stood up and stepped back. He didn't salute. That was for ceremonies and officers. Instead, he simply nodded. One grunt to another. "Let's go home, Buddy," Gavin said. Turning his back on the memorial. Buddy barked a sharp, happy sound that echoed off the valley walls and bounded ahead, leading the way back down the trail. The walk back felt different. The pack on Gavin's soul was gone. He noticed the way the sunlight filtered through the new leaves, creating a mosaic of light on the forest floor. He noticed the vibrant purple of the wildflowers pushing up through the dead leaves. When they reached the cabin, the sun was fully up, bathing the log structure in warmth. The dark, menacing fortress of the winter was gone. Now it just looked like a home. Gavin walked up the steps and sat down on the old wooden rocking chair on the porch. He picked up his coffee mug, now lukewarm, but he didn't care. Buddy followed him up the stairs. The dog didn't go to his guard post by the door, didn't pace the perimeter. Instead, he walked over to the rocking chair and sat down right next to Gavin. Buddy let out a long, contented sigh and leaned his head against Gavin's knee. Gavin rested his hand on the dog's head, fingers burying themselves in the thick, soft fur behind the ears. He began to stroke rhythmically, a soothing motion that was as much for him as it was for the dog. I sat there in silence, watching the morning mist burn off the valley floor. There was no need for words. They were two survivors who'd found each other in the storm. They'd faced the darkness, fought the monsters, and come out the other side. Gavin took a sip of his coffee and looked out at the vast, enduring wilderness. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he wasn't waiting for something bad to happen. He wasn't scanning the perimeter for threats. He was just sitting on his porch with his dog. "You know, Buddy," Gavin said softly, breaking the silence, "I think the trout are going to be running in the creek soon. What do you say we go down there later and see if we can catch dinner?" Buddy looked up, tail thumping a steady rhythm against the porch floorboards. He licked Gavin's hand, amber eyes full of unconditional affection. Gavin smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners of his weathered face. The covenant made in the rain and sealed in blood had become something else entirely. It was a promise of peace. And as the sun climbed higher, warming the old man and the silver dog, Gavin Mercer finally closed the door on the winter of his life and stepped into the spring. In the end, but he taught us that true loyalty is not about obligation, but the quiet choice to stay, even when the storm is past. Sometimes, the heroes we need do not wear capes, but simply offer a warm presence to lean on when we are too tired to stand alone.